All across the country on American college campuses, there is a bizarre and troubling phenomenon taking place, which are that you have students who are marching and agitating for the Hamas position. In fact, celebrating the attack on Israel that took place on October 7th, including honoring the terrorists as, quote, martyrs. That's exactly what happened right here in our area at George Washington University last week, as you had a number of students projecting images onto the side of the school library at George Washington University saying, quote, glory to our martyrs. What do the students on campus think about this, the ones who aren't on board with the pro-Hamas talking points? And in particular, what do the Jewish students think? Let's bring in Sabrina Soffer now. She's a Jewish undergrad at George Washington University and joins us on the phone. Hello, Sabrina. Good to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on this today. It's really important to cover these stories, especially what's going on here at GW. Jewish students, I'll preface with this, Jewish students don't feel safe on campus. My mom actually just told me that unequivocally I have to take off my Star of David. She really is afraid for my safety. So, and this is something I've really never done before, but based on what's going on at GW and across the country, I guess that's going to be the safest choice for me at this point.
So do you wear you wear a Star of David as a necklace? Is that how you display it?
I wear a Star of David. I wear a Mezuzah, my name in Hebrew or something. It's something I've done since I was little. The Star of David I got was for my bat mitzvah from a family member, and I actually just replaced it with a Star of David that folds open, so it looks like butterflies now instead of a star. So I guess that's the reality we live in today.
That's amazing, and it's so sad that that's the situation. Are other Jewish students doing something similar in your, as far as you know?
You know, I have some friends who will keep it on, and I've been defiant and kept it on until this point. But given my publicity and everything else, I think because I'm a public face, my parents who live now in California,
yes.
They're very concerned, and I guess that if that's going to make them be assured, I guess myself be reassured as well in my safety, I guess that's the only way to go about it for now.
Sabrina, obviously this interview you and I are doing, it's not the first interview you've done, as you've just alluded to. You also did an interview with the Fox News channel, and what kind of feedback have you received from that? I'm using feedback almost euphemistically at this point, but what reaction have you detected as a result of doing these interviews?
Yeah, so I've also written articles, and I think I've gotten somewhat more of a response, although indirectly from that. I also do a lot of work on social media, and I post different videos. But from the interviews on Fox and such, I honestly don't think that the people who are opposed to my message will even listen to Fox News.
Sure. So
I think that's one thing. But in terms of like my Instagram, my DMs, that I'm receiving such hateful messages. I've posted on TikTok multiple times in the past, which I recently deleted TikTok because it was just too much.
Yeah.
Like I've had somebody to tell me to go die in the gas chambers. Like it's pretty crazy out there on social media.
Yes.
Articles, in terms of articles, you know, I wrote something in the student newspaper. I wrote 2 articles, but one of them actually discussed the concept of martyrs in Islam. I had a Palestinian friend of mine who luckily we're still able to talk amid all this, which is honestly miraculous. She and I had a conversation about what a martyr means. And she said, you must be careful because in Islam, anybody who dies, even in a natural disaster, in war, in collateral damage, is considered a martyr. So then I asked her and I said, well, why don't you condemn Hamas so we don't confuse groups like you guys who don't stand for Hamas with the terrorists, right? Because that's bad for them. And, you know, long story short, she said basically that like they weren't willing to do that. So still, the moral idiocy is still there, right? You can,
yes.
And I made that very clear in the article. And the next day, the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at GW posted something about the word martyr, which still justified Hamas's actions. So, it's that was one comment. But I know that, in the past I've had hostility from this student group at GW, threats and such. And at this point, given that my parents know the history of that and I know the hostility I've received over the years that I've been here,
Yeah.
I guess it is the safest bet. I just don't know what can happen, and I'd rather avoid anything. I need to focus on my studies here too. So
Yes, definitely. But I'm grateful that you're speaking out, though, because this story needs to be told. So you mentioned it's interesting that you said you got off of TikTok. I saw there's a writer by the name of Abigail Schreier who this week said that she expressed this on Twitter. She said that TikTok's propaganda algorithms helped convince an entire generation to support the massacre of Jews, she wrote. Imagine what TikTok will do when we need to stand up to China. Obviously, she's bringing this to the next point, which is dealing with China. China controls TikTok. Do you agree with that basic assessment, though, that TikTok has warped the minds of so many young people to the point that they're cheering on Hamas now?
I do believe that social media has played an instrumental role in, the culture that we're seeing today. In BDS, which it's the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, they've created this propaganda machine apparatus that infiltrates social media, the media, university campuses. And because social media is so popular amongst youth, and it makes it seem moral, people will just repost, retweet without even thinking, because these videos can be made so appealing. And then it just spreads by the speed of light, basically. So that's the power of social media. And given the work I do on social media, I'm not one to go fight propaganda with propaganda, because I don't think that's the right thing to do. But it's so crazy how people aren't taught to critically think. And this takes me to the point that I wanted to address, is that in the universities, there's a whole culture that's pervaded the minds of young people. And it's in this culture of, we have the oppressed and the oppressor, and all the people deemed oppressors are bad and they should be resisted even violently. And then all the oppressed are the underdogs, and we must sympathize with them no matter what, even if that requires violence. So it's this combined with misinformation and hate speech that breeds the violence that we see today. And this sort of ideology is being perpetuated in the classroom on top of the distortion of facts that's also occurring. Not in every classroom, but many.
There's a video this week I'm just seeing today from Harvard. Harvard students are against Israel. They're protesting against Israel. And in the video, they surround a Jewish student and they refuse to let him leave. They're in a public space. They're standing out in green space on a sidewalk. And it looks like it's just one Jewish student. There may be others there. But the anti-Israel group surrounds him, and they essentially refuse. They detain him. They refuse to let him even leave. They press up against him with their signs and their chanting. That's got to be, first of all, nauseating. It is for me to see. But what do you make of this phenomenon that you have students who feel so comfortable just straight up assaulting their fellow students on account of their what appears to be Judaism?
Yeah, I'd like to say, and so this is something I've always said, they're victims of hate. These kids who are perpetuating these acts, it's tragic for them, because really they're wasting their time, they're wasting their life basically being steeped in hatred. But at this point, I don't know how much this can be undone, right? And a student, for being Jewish, should never have to endure what they're putting these students through. For example, at Tulane University as well.
Yep.
That's another instance of complete violence, and it's like anarchy has broken out in the streets. It's almost like, and this is something that I've been sharing with my parents, and what gets me so afraid is that we're living in a society that's like Nazi Germany. And we see this around the world. And these things are being justified, not condemned, and they continue to pervade. So that's why attacks like that at Harvard, like that at Tulane, and at Berkeley, and at GW, like what happened on Saturday, where demonstrators of a pro-Palestinian rally came to the ZBT frat house, which is a Jewish frat, and they started waving flagpoles so as to strike the brothers. If security wasn't there, it would have turned into a hate crime. So when we talk about hate speech leading to hate crimes, and then people say we should have free speech unless there's no violence, that argument is bogus. So obviously some accountability and action needs to be taken against these groups.
Well, there's, you mentioned, we talk about the kind of the impact of all of this, and I do wonder to what extent this very public display of hatred for people just because of their faith and because of Israel's existence has the effect of making people recoil and being like, oh my God, I didn't even know this existed in our country, that this was happening to this extent. I do see to some extent in kind of the elite media, there's a debate now about how much the left should grapple with its own anti-Semitism, and there appears to be some split in the party on their party on that question. Do you think that there is a sea change coming? Is it possible that all of this public insanity will lead to something better?
I really hope the world wakes up, and I think some people are. People who are morally sound and they haven't been entirely corrupted by misinformation and this radicalization of ideology, I think they will see the light. But unfortunately, amongst youth, I don't think that's going in the right direction, because there's a survey done, I think it's like a Harvard CAPS poll, and it said that 48% of young people, I think aged 18 to 24, would support Hamas over Israel in this situation.
Crazy.
So what will that look like 10 to 20 years from now if this ideology and these groups aren't stopped?
So I'm sorry, but what about on your campus after the events of October 7th, the terrorist attack on Israel, the beheading of children, the rape of women, the death of Israelis, the kidnapping of all these Israeli Jews, Americans? After all of that, and then, of course, you had the blow up on campus as the anti-Israel crowd, the pro-Hamas crowd, was trying to, I think, glorify our martyrs, glory to our martyrs. Were there any students on campus that you're aware of who said, well, wait a second, and they started to wake up from all of this and go, this is insane, I can't believe what I'm experiencing? Or are they just blind to what actually took place?
So actually, yes. So there were two instances. Just directly after October 7th, there was a pro-Israel Jewish students, a pro-Israel vigil. Students came together to mourn what happened on October 7th, and the following day, the anti-Israel student groups came out and had their own vigil that was basically pro-terrorist. And that was very clear. But what a few students and I did, actually, I think it was three of us, we stood on the opposite side, very far away from them. And we just stood there, like holding signs, holding an Israeli flag, didn't do anything. And there were some kids who came up to us and started asking questions. Some were very sympathetic and they said, I can't believe what they're doing. I saw what happened in Israel. I'm so sorry for your families and your friends. And I can't believe what your community is going through. And others they were like, I don't know much about this. I really want to learn from your perspective because I hear a lot from the other side.
Right.
And that's the approach that students need to take. And unfortunately, in universities and on social media, there's not really much room for that left. And that's the scary part.
So here's the question for you then. Is it your impression that the students who don't know what to think on this subject, and to the extent that they're sympathetic to the kind of pro-Hamas, anti-Israel side of the equation, are they in some way convinced that the events of October 7th didn't take place, or that it was like some sort of like a hoax or something? I mean, is that a view among some of these students?
I think there's certainly pieces of misinformation going around that would support that argument. And I don't know to what extent they believe that.
Okay.
But I know there are certainly people that do, and they're using the whole, Gaza, the operation now that Israel is doing in self-defense to say, yeah, Israel wanted this all along. Like October 7th was nothing compared to what we have now. So the narrative is, of course, changing. And some of them are convinced that October 7th was nothing, which is, totally absurd. And that's really the whole change in this story now is going to lend a lot of hostility to Israel, which goes in line with what I said previously about is the world going to wake up? And I think that this would also further the argument that it might actually get worse. But at the end of the day, there's a quote by Golda Meir. She was the late Israeli prime minister during the Yom Kippur War. She said, if I had to choose between being alive and having a bad image, or having a good image and being defenseless, I'd rather choose having a bad image and being alive. Something along that sort. And I think that that's what we're dealing with here, not only for Israel, but for Jews around the world.
It's a wild time to live through. Sabrina Soffer, Jewish undergrad student over at George Washington University. Thank you very much for your time and your insight today, Sabrina. Really nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. Have a great day.